Good evening. Until a few years ago, I bet you'd never even blimmin' heard of the 1922 committee, which of course is the committee of Conservative members of Parliament. But given that the party is about to elect its sixth leader, they're back, of course, in the news today, and its chairman, Bob Blackman, read out the scores on the doors in the middle of this afternoon as to who was to be eliminated from the Conservative leadership race.
And declare the result of the third ballot in the leadership contest. 120 votes were cast, and the votes for each candidate were as follows: Kemi Badenoch, 30, James Cleverly, 39, Robert Jenrick, 31, and Tom Tugendhat, 20. So as a result of that ballot, Tom Tugendhat is eliminated from the contest.
So, as predicted, Tom Tugendhat is out. And as I said to you last week, when I sat and watched very, very carefully the speeches that they all gave at the Conservative Party conference, it was clear to me that Cleverly was the one that impressed. I'm not talking policy, I'm talking about looking like somebody who actually was in command, and Cleverly was miles better than the other. The big disappointment for those on the centre-right of the Conservative Party, I think, to be honest, was the performance of Jenrick. You know, if you go out and speak without notes and wander around the stage, you have to have the charisma to back it up. And frankly, I don't think that Jenrick had that. And that's why his vote is down and Badenoch kind of is up a little bit but holds steady. The next round of voting is tomorrow. Who makes the last two? Well, I'll tell you, Cleverly clearly makes the last two. And in fact, you would expect, in policy and positioning terms, him to get many of the Tugendhat votes. So who makes it through between Jenrick on 31 and Badenoch on 40? Here is my guess. My guess is that the Cleverly camp and the Conservative establishment will lend a few votes to Kemi Badenoch because they don't want Jenrick, because Jenrick wants to do things like leave the ECHR, and that would never do. So that's my prediction. That's what will happen. It'll be Cleverly versus Badenoch. That's my view. Keen to know from you, who do you think makes the last two? And, oh, by the way, do you actually care? Please email farage@gbnews.com. I'm joined in tonight's endeavour by Sir George Howarth, former Labour Member of Parliament and Junior Minister under Tony Blair, and Lord Monckton, hereditary peer and former Conservative political advisor. So, Lord Monckton, who do you think makes the last two?
I think you've got it absolutely right. And after all, do you really want Jenrick to go through, given that I think he's asked for your retirement, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, fat chance of that, I'd say.
So I think it's Jenrick that's going to get the retirement, and I think the other two will go through. And I think it probably will be Cleverly that gets it. I agree with you as to the speeches at the party conference. He was clearly the man who had the presence of a potential Prime Minister. And the others remind me of a ballot in the Labour Party a few years ago where there were two candidates, Michael Foot and Ted Short. And the ballot paper, in a wonderful cartoon in The Spectator, we just said, Foot, Short. And one Labour MP saying to the other, neither of them has the stature to do this.
Well, George, you'll remember those days, of course.
I do. I wasn't an MP at the time, but I was very politically active. Yeah. I mean, to answer your question, which two? I think your assessment is right. It'll be Badenoch and Cleverly, whichever way round.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is that whichever of them, even if it had been Robert Jenrick, the problem the Conservative Party have got is that they don't really know where they want to be. They don't know whether they're going to be further to the right or a bit towards the centre.
And they're very divided.
Pardon?
They're very divided in Parliament.
They are, and I've always been shocked. You know, the Labour Party has always had a reputation for falling out with each other, and sometimes we do. But privately, when you talk to some of the Tory MPs, certainly in the last Parliament, the divisions between them was visceral and vicious all at the same time. And I'm not sure that's gone away.
And that's, of course, why reform came through because a huge wing of the Tory party simply wasn't represented by anyone.
Yeah, and voters deserve to know what they're voting for.
Exactly.
And I think that's the point, isn't it? You know. Now, moving on from that, because it probably doesn't matter that much, really. Moving on from that, I mean, the story, George, that, you know, that we know of, 1 in 100 of the UK population are here illegally, which is far more than France or Germany or Italy, despite all the things that we're told. I mean, David Blunkett, I mean, go back 20 years, but David Blunkett as Home Secretary said, well, how can I tell how many people are here illegally? It may even be more than this. It's pretty shocking, isn't it?
I mean, it's a worry. And, you know, any country has to have control of its borders if it's going to have control over what happens to all the public services, for example.
Yes.
But I think the problem that we've got now is the same problem as the previous government had, and that is people who are crossing the channel mostly illegally, and well, in fact, in all cases illegally. And how do you get a grip on that? And it's early days for this government, but I think they're going to head for cooperation between other European states on a bilateral basis, because we're no longer in the EU. That has to be the key to it.
If the EU allow that.
Well, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't, because although there are parts of the EU that would like, you know, quite happy with levels of immigration as long as it's not coming to them.
Yeah, quite.
Other parts, France, Germany and others, have really got worries about it, and there is, on their part, an imperative for cooperation if you're going to get on top of it.
But I would argue, George, that all the while people are coming across the Mediterranean in large numbers, that's a far bigger concern to them than those that transit through their countries and come to Britain.
Well, it is, but I mean, the routes are different, for example. So, you know, people have got to go, say, from North Africa right across Europe to get to France so they can cross the Channel. And if we can control, first of all, the routes to get to the Channel, and secondly, if we can get control over what happens in the Channel, and, you know, the border force proposals that the governments have got hopefully will help to do that, then you've got a chance of tackling it. At the moment, you know, as the last government found out, you can have all of the rhetoric in the world, but if it doesn't work, then you need to rethink it.
George puts the case for what Labour are trying to do.
Yeah.
I rather think, Christopher, what happened with the last government was they realised this issue was going right up the agenda.
Yeah.
And the reason is not just numbers, the reason is a sense of unfairness. You know, how is it that our son and daughter can't get on the social housing list? Why is it our rents are going through the roof? How is it we can't get a GP appointment? How is it these people get 4-star hotels? I think it was the unfairness of it. But isn't the reason really, when you think about all the promises that Boris Johnson made, Rishi Sunak sort of staking his premiership on stopping the boats, isn't the real reason that unless you deport people who come illegally, they're going to keep coming?
You have to do that. You also have to send the right signals. Margaret Thatcher had this problem very early in her premiership, and she then got a backbencher to ask her a question. What are you going to do about illegal immigration? And she stood up and went to the dispatch box and said, if you're thinking of coming to this country illegally, then you can think again. We now have in place the toughest regime for handling those of you who come here illegally. You will be arrested, you will be detained, you will be sent straight back where you came from, and that will be that. And they stopped coming. The fact that you send a signal is good, but the signal that was sent by the last Conservative government, a great friend of yours and mine, I won't say who, was approached. He has a large country house in Taunton, and he was approached by the Home Office, and they said, we'd like you to lend us your house for 7 years, and we'll give you £1 million if you'll do that. And we're going to put illegal migrants into it. And can you imagine if you're some Albanian, you get put into the swankiest house in the West Country. The first thing is get on the phone to your mate and say, you've got to come to Britain. This is paved with gold.
There is some truth in that.
And it's this kind of utter stupidity on the part of the Home Office, which is just about the worst of all the government departments.
What is interesting, George, to me, is if you go back, I mentioned Blunkett. Actually, Blair and Blunkett were really tough on this.
Yes.
Were really tough on this. And that Labour government were deporting illegals in very, very big numbers, and yet don't appear to have the power to do it now. And I'm going to put it to you that it's the creeping power of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg that has caused this problem.
Personally, I don't think it's the problem that some people make out. And I was involved as a Home Office minister in introducing that legislation.
Yeah.
And we introduced it for very good reasons. It was repatriating European law into English law so that people could access it more easily. Now, with the passage of time, you need to review everything. But I think there's possibility that, for example, and I'm not advocating this, but I think there needs to be the potential for a derogation, for example, on certain aspects of it. But that has to be negotiated. You can't just unilaterally declare it.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. That we
But
finish
you
up,
also have to deal with the French.
We finish up this segment talking about ECHR, derogations, and how we deal with it.